Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. We're going to have a conversation today about the economy, manufacturing, specifically agriculture-based manufacturing, where it's built, who's buying, who's working. What are the challenges facing the industry right now? What's it telling us about the farm economy in general? What signs are pointing to an up or down market? Right now, it's off. But why? We're going to look back at some of the numbers. We're going to dive into some of the issues that are facing manufacturers and just kind of the farm economy as a whole. We kind of divulged a little bit or diverged a little bit in that with Curt Blades. He's the Senior Vice President for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. It's an American-based group that looks at manufacturers, big and small, across America. What issues are they talking about with the lawmakers in Washington and in state issues? We're going to talk about his time in FFA and how FFA and 4-H can play a role in the future of America, specifically rural America. He's an old Missouri guy. We'll talk about some of the small town things there, but we start that any Tiger fan will know and how we start this discussion. If you have any feedback for me, hit me up at an email at paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. Now, simple exchange to get us started. Old habits die hard, so if I say M-I-Z...
Z-O-U?
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't. It
doesn't go away.
No, it does not.
So when you see Eli Drinkowitz, the head football coach, end his interviews with that...
Yes.
What's that make you think?
Well, sometimes I scream to the TV screen, Z-O-U. It's just habit.
So from Missouri, went to Mizzou.
Yep.
Tell me about growing up in Northeast Missouri.
Well, I'm sixth generation farm kid from Northeast Missouri. Shelbina is the name of the town. We just became a century farm just a little over about 5 years ago. So pretty proud of that. Corn, soybeans, wheat, cattle is what we grew. Active like most farm kids in 4-H FFA, and that sparked your interest in agriculture, where I was kind of spent my entire career. Went to Missouri, graduated with a degree in ag economics, and have had a really interesting career that landed where I am today.
And you could have stayed on the farm? ? Or were you one of those that the math doesn't compute?
I had the opportunity to. I also have a brother-in-law who's running the farm full-time right now, and actually his nephew. So we've got now the seventh generation, and it was a better fit for them than it was for me.
Do you still identify? I mean, it's clearly part of your bio. It's part of your life, and it's in your blood. Can't shake it.
Exactly. And you talk to any farm kid, they'll say the exact same thing. It's just part of who I am.
As an ag econ major, is the vision for a young Curt to go, I want to be a market analyst, I want to trade commodities, or manufacturing was kind of something that stuck out to you?
I had a better idea of what I wanted to do when I was 18 than I do now that I'm 52. So it's funny how life ends up working things. But what I did know at that particular time is that I wanted to make a difference in the industry that I care a lot about. It's part of my DNA, and I pinch myself every day because I arguably have one of the coolest jobs in the world, representing equipment manufacturers all around the world, and specifically here in the United States.
I've spent a little time in Missouri over the years, and I drive certain roads, and I certainly see a lot of smaller manufacturers that are around there, and I can do the same in Iowa and in other spots. Tell me about the difference between the large companies and the small companies in your world.
Well, one thing that you find with all manufacturers within agriculture in the United States, and AEM, we represent all sizes, is they're all founded basically with the same premise. It's all farm kids that had it in their DNA, and they wanted to make life just a little bit easier. I love the small manufacturers because that's where innovation tends to happen. That's where they don't necessarily have the weight of a large organization to stifle creativity. And you see innovation happen in the small manufacturing all over the place. each one of these large businesses that we're familiar with, they started out as small, one entrepreneur or two entrepreneurs that they created those things to begin with. So the differences at the DNA level are exactly the same. The operations become a little bit different. You can look through the 200 years that we've been farming here in the United States at a commercial level, and you see that there's some innovations that have changed. There's been some companies that have come, some companies that have gone. You see some companies that were in huge favor 20 years ago that are no longer around, and companies that were pretty unsuccessful 20 years ago that are flying high right now. So it ebbs and flows. But what's interesting is that the spirit of agriculture is always the same. That spirit of innovation, trying to squeeze just a little bit more out of the land with a little bit less input, is still what everybody strives to do every day.
I want to talk about trends in the industry, but I want to go back to what you just said about those that might have been in favor a few years ago that aren't. And what is the DNA of those companies that have maybe weathered the cycle on a more consistent or maybe have fallen a little more volatile?
Well, it's basic business practices. We are, there's no secret, we're kind of in a little bit of a downturn right now in the ag economy. And those companies that have weathered those previous storms kind of recognize, we're coming off of some pretty great years in agriculture. The last 10, 15 have been really good. Those were coming off of some pretty rough ones. So those companies that have that memory of when it was tough 15, 20 years ago, made the appropriate adjustments, seeing these trends that are happening right now and adjusting either the production or making sure their savings and their balance sheet is in a good spot. Those are the ones that continue to weather the storm. And that's sort of just basic business principles. And then every once in a while, somebody hits lightning in a bottle and finds a particular innovation that catches fire, and that changes the dynamics of everything. And boy, I tell you what, here in the Midwest, there are stories after stories after stories of just cool innovations that made a difference, that started a company out of nowhere just because somebody had a really good idea.
And sometimes those companies, they draw the attention of the larger ones, and they say, you know what, we like that, or you've done it much better. It happens in all industries.
Absolutely. In fact, that's where I mentioned that a lot of times those innovations happen at the small company level, because big companies, they recognize that their R&D is going to be able to deliver some really good things. And I don't want to discount the level of R&D and innovation that's coming from some of these great story brands based right here in Des Moines. But a lot of times they're the first to recognize is that they can only go so far just because of other things that they're trying to come into play. And it's not uncommon. I spent some time in the startup space in the 90s, and many times that exit strategy for a startup company is your exit strategy is to be acquired by somebody else.
So let's go to your story then. So you graduate Missouri, and you have your sights set as an engineer. How did you get to where you're at now?
I went to work for Farmland Industries, and that's how I fell in love with Iowa in the early 90s when Farmland Industries was
Is that something
around.
you can say out loud in Missouri at home?
I think so.
Okay.
The people in Iowa kind of make fun of Missouri, but the people in Missouri kind of make fun of Iowa. So it's mutually assured destruction when you talk about it. But I worked for Farmland Industries. Used to travel around the upper Midwest, working with the co-ops. And this is early 90s when you remember what was going on then with consolidation of some of those story brands that are now national brands were local here in Farnonville or in West Central. Crazy stories that I was, fortunate to be a part of. I did that for, all the way up. We all know unfortunately, how the story of farmland ended in the late 90s. But then the .com boom was, starting at about that time and knocking on my door, and had the opportunity to join a startup organization as employee number 7. And I have about, $20 million worth of stock options that are worth exactly zero today in a company that was a lot of fun, but that provided some good learning experience that did bring me here to Iowa, working for Successful Farming and running, helping with the business side of Successful Farming Magazine and Meredith Corporation, Meredith Agrimedia. That brought me to Iowa. I've been here for going on 15 years. From then, I've always spent most of my life close to the manufacturing business and manufacturing industry. And when the opportunity presented itself to join the Association of Equipment Manufacturers and run the Ag Division, I jumped right on it. It wasn't even a question.
Well, how would you describe the agency then that you work for?
So the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, AEM, is we represent non-road equipment in 5 sectors: ag, construction, forestry, mining, and utilities. So if you think of that, that is the storied brands that we're familiar with here in Iowa, the green ones, the red ones, the yellow ones, the gold ones, but also those small companies, the technology companies, the service providers, so just a little over 1,000 members across the U.S. and Canada. My job specifically is overseeing the ag operations as the primary lead, but then I'm secondary lead on the other sectors as well. I oversee all of our regulatory and compliance work and market share statistics and economics. I mean, we're really good as AEM at doing things that nobody sees or nobody knows that we do. Best way to describe it. Every one of your listeners and viewers, I'm sure, has seen that twisty PTO guy on the decal that says, "Don't put your fingers there." AEM is the global library for those decals, and one member of my team is solely responsible for making sure that those decals are available for all the pieces of equipment in all 5 of those segments. So really interesting stuff, truly saves lives. But would you ever have known that happens in Wisconsin, or that I'm the one that's doing it? No, that's kind of beside the point. It's just a fun role.
And you have also a way to know. You talk about trends. You know what's going on, and you're also looking at. I mean, are these groups that you these companies that you represent as a whole, report to you data? Do you go for them for data to understand and how you put together reports? So
we do a lot of analysis. I mean, again, I pinch myself every day because I get the best job in the world, where I'm in regular contact with the executives of those companies. So we regularly get a sense for what's going on, both at that kind of qualitative conversations. But in addition to that, the manufacturers all participate in a market share program where they present their information anonymously, and that's aggregated and put back out to them. AEM facilitates that. We don't ever see that market share data, but we do see the aggregated data that talks about where tractors and combine sales are. That helps feed some of the other analysis that you combine that with information from USDA and other sources, and you get a pretty good indication of what the market looks like today. We don't make a habit of looking into the future because that's kind of a dangerous thing to do, but we do provide good information that other people can create their own opinions off of.
So more of a look back than a look forward?
We tend to not have an official looking forward position.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's fine, because we all know, as long as we know what reports are,
exactly,
and not forecasting. So what is it on the look back that when you say things haven't been good, what is the flag that starts to fly up that gets your attention first?
Well, the best way to describe the equipment market is again, it's cyclical. It's agriculture. Just like, you don't buy a combine for next year's harvest. You buy a combine for the next 5, 10, 15 years harvest, depending on how you're set up. And so, the ag equipment market is a really good indicator of the overall ag economy. And sometimes we're an early indicator of is the psyche of farmers a little bit soft right now. During the pandemic, tractor sales were through the roof. And it was specifically small tractors. We couldn't satisfy the need. And basically what that amounted to was that, folks might have been taking their trip to Europe, can't go to Europe, so they invest in their property and buying small tractors. That's not necessarily an ag market, but it certainly benefited those manufacturers because they sold out of tractors. Quickly following that was, the supply chain shortages that came about as a result of the pandemic. That led to some really good sales years for new equipment. And if you look back to the 2000s, early 2020s, all the way up until about 2023, we were year over year growth really, really good in all classes of tractors and combines. But I think what happened is that need's kind of been satisfied, And then we started to see, late 23 and certainly early 24, those tractor sales start to tighten up just a little bit. And you would see that same reflected in some of the headlines where maybe there was some staff reductions or reductions in productions in anticipation of what we kind of saw this coming, that this is going to be a little bit of a soft time for tractors and combine sales. And so for the last year, 2024, we were down across pretty much all categories of tractors and combines. That's after some really strong years previously. But I think that's just a good indication, like that's sort of where the ag economy is right now.
So it sounds like more of a worn out, we've made the purchase. It's not necessarily a reflection of higher interest rates, lower commodity prices. I mean, those are factors.
They are all factors.
Does one weigh more than the other?
Well, it's funny that you asked that question, because usually what I would say is that the biggest indication of a tractor purchase is, do you need it or not? But if you also ask a farmer, it's like, how much longer will this tractor, excuse me, how much longer will this tractor last? And the answer is oftentimes, well, just one more year. But if the psyche of a farmer is such and they feel really good about the market, they're willing to make some purchases. And so I think that's where those incremental purchases come into play. Now, having said that, over the last year, interest rates, I've been hearing more than ever when talking to farmer friends, interest rates are more of a factor than they've been in years past. Obviously, the outlook of commodity prices, the storm clouds that are out there, whether it's related to biofuels or global trade or whatever else it might be, there's just a number of storm clouds that are sort of weighing into that softness of the new market. And that's just kind of one of those cyclical things. This too will pass, but this is where we are right now.
New sales are one thing, but the stories over the last 6 months to a year have been, used market. Check out that used market. How much do you follow that?
Well, obviously, I'm most interested in the new market because that's the business that I'm in. But in agriculture, you can't. And certainly in tractors, I mean, they're hand in glove, and most of the times there's a lot of value left in those machines. And so depending on, if a farmer is set up for new equipment, they're buying new equipment. If a farmer's set up to be that second user of equipment, that's the market that they're in. And so we pay really close attention to that. Oftentimes you can't buy a new, oftentimes you $500,000 piece of equipment unless you get rid of the residual of that previous $500,000 piece of equipment. So that's really an important place for us to pay attention to. The used market has been really strong lately for a number of, certainly for a number of the classes. You can go into some of those specifics, but I think there were some bargains to be found not too long ago. I think maybe those are starting to dry up just a little bit.
Bargains in used or in new?
Bargains in used to be found a little while ago, but those are starting to dry up. The reason why I mention all of this together is that it's so important to have the new and the used market synced up really well. Because you think about how much of a farmer's asset base, complete balance sheet, is based off of that equipment balance sheet. You don't want those used markets to go south. You don't want to oversaturate the market with new equipment, because that affects a farmer's ability to get loans. That affects all sorts of things. It affects the dealership lot and their floor plan and maybe their ability to be a stable business. So it's a delicate balance to make sure that the used market is where it needs to be, the new market is where it needs to be, and inventories don't get too inflated. You can usually tell the health of the ag economy when you're driving through small towns and you see how many tractors are on a dealer lot. And when you start to see those get to be a little bit populated, I get to worry a little bit.
Because the anecdote that I was told last summer at the state fair in talking to different farmers was they were hearing that those who own lots with new equipment were hearing a lot from the salespeople at those places saying, I got a deal for you. We're trying. Yep. Basically, everybody's trying to move that inventory.
Exactly.
Is that reflective in data that was probably true in the middle of 2024?
I think there was some deals to be had, and I think it was kind of clearing out some of that inventory in anticipation of a slowdown.
And so then also want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago about there's some that always buy new, some that always buy. I'm sitting there doing the math in my head. I'm guessing the rough numbers. broken into four parts. There's the 25% that always buy new. There's the 25% that never buy new, and then there's that middle 50
That can be swing
either way, right?
Based off of the situation.
Is that pretty accurate?
That's not. It's pretty accurate. That's not too far from the actual.
So then that middle 50 though is where everybody's going to make or break a trend.
That determines whether it's a good year or not, or a bad year. Oftentimes that's where, and the other thing that falls into that trend and the profitability of those machines or those companies are, we talk about tractors and combines because they're easy and everybody can relate to them, but it's the implements, it's the hay and forage equipment that also come into that total profit margin, and that's where there can be some pretty big swings in that market as well.
It goes back to what I asked you at the very beginning about your home area, my home area. There's a lot of those little manufacturers of hay and manure and spray or whatever that are dependent on somebody buying a new machine or buying a machine. And so it does trickle beyond just the farm. It's the farm community that is important. So therefore, extremely important to monitor.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, the numbers that we throw out with AEM is that our industry, or the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, represents about 3.2 million jobs. It's quite a few jobs. Those are direct and indirect. So if you think about those small towns that you mentioned, it's the small town, it's the direct job, it's the person who's turning the wrenches, but it's the coffee shop as well that only exists because there's people that are getting paid to turn those wrenches. So it's a very important part of rural America.
So I ask, who's buying right now? Is it still the large, or are there still some medium to small operators that have the capital that buy, that go back to, I think you said something about more of a scheduled buy, and they were able to weather that big run in 2020?
There's no simple formula as who's buying right now. I mean, it's a completely an individual business decision. But I will say that those farmers that have good working relationships with their dealers and the manufacturers and a well thought out equipment plan, they're buying. They're buying whether the market's up or whether the market's down, because that's what their business is set up to do. I think we learned something during the pandemic where the supply chains were tight, is like that's where everybody kind of needs to be, because you can plan ahead for those purchase needs. So those people are buying regardless. We oftentimes refer to that as the replacement market. It's like every 5-7 years I'm going to buy a new tractor. Those folks are buying regardless. We are seeing those that want to take advantage of new technology. I mean, I hear some different stories about buying a new harvester as an example. If you're running a harvester that is approaching 20 years old, being able to take advantage of the new technology in a new harvester, because of fuel savings alone, can almost pay for itself in a year, just because it's 20% more efficient. You're dealing with less weather risk. So those folks that are making those decisions are considering updating their technology, and so that's part of the market. There are those that are acting completely independent of the ag economy, the small tractor market. That's kind of based on the economy or a whim or a bonus or something else that comes into play that considers those factors. And then it's after that, it's just basically what's the need. Did the old tractor finally wear out? It's just time to update. And sometimes that happens.
You talk like numbers are the main part of your game, but where does policy fit into what you do?
It's every farmer knows that we have things that we can't control. We can't control the weather. We can't necessarily control global trade. We can't control policy, but we know that we are impacted by all of those types of things. So it's a very important part of our job at the association, but it's an important part of every farmer. I mean, we're sitting here in the Midwest where I think the voters take that job very seriously, because they know that global trade matters. They know that biofuels matter. They know that any sort of those tax policies make a big difference on their profit and losses. We spend a lot of time dealing with that, both in the state houses as well as federally and in Canada as well. We've been incredibly disappointed that we don't have a farm bill that weighs into. I mean, it just can't help but weigh into tractor sales. And we've been shouting from the rooftop whenever we get a chance to talk about that. So we're hoping that hopefully gets resolved pretty soon. But not just passing a farm bill, but passing a farm bill that sets farmers up to take advantage of new technologies to do more with less, be more environmentally sustainable, all those types of things. Been big advocates of those coming into farm bills. So that's the type of policy work that we do, in addition to, good tax policy, good trade policy, and making sure that the regulatory environment is such that innovation can happen all across America to allow farmers to do more with less.
Those all sound like secondary things that you monitor that are maybe not necessarily on the units sold, but it's the company that makes it and the person that's buying whatever your big, medium, and small company is.
Well, as an association, it's one of our top pillars. But as obviously when representing farmers here, it's something that happens in the background. A lot of the things we do happen in the background just for the benefit of the industry.
And you have to be involved in, I'm sure there is a policy or political lobby side of your industry that does. What are some of those talking points that they do on the federal level?
Yeah, so we've got 12 full-time lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and I don't know, 6 or 7 out in the States. Their talking points are, on ag specifically, let's get a farm bill. And rural America, let's support rural broadband. Let's support those types of things that make America strong and rural America strong to support these manufacturing jobs. Right behind that are some of those bigger issues that are facing all of business and all of society. We've got a workforce shortage. We have 1,000 members. Every single one of them is hiring. And so, obviously we want to deal with good education, but also that touches that third rail of immigration, and how do you make sure that there are good workers for the plants as well as the operators of the machines. So those are the things that we begin to deal with. I mentioned regulatory reform, or just I think there's a very important role that regulations play, but making sure that they're not burdensome to a manufacturer, to a business, that allows them to be in a good business space. Tax reform, really important to us, especially to provide those incentives for manufacturers and innovators to, participate in the innovation process, build up tractors that can drive themselves. But there's got to be incentives to do that, or there's got to be the right tax situation for that to happen. So all of these things, we just put a little bit of an ag spin on it, or we put an equipment spin on it, and it makes a big difference.
Because when you have a manufacturer in a small, I keep thinking of the smaller community, not necessarily where the Caterpillars, the John Deeres, and the Case are at in larger
They're often
community.
in small towns
but they also have small town.
Yeah.
But that's also important about the workforce.
You bet.
And having employees who are trained,
Yep.
and those who are interested in doing the job. I mean, you think about, I can name several that have worked on, their day job is maybe building a tractor or a sprayer, and their afternoon job is farming.
Absolutely.
So I mean those two jobs
over and over again, that story is told.
And so that is important to have a trained workforce. And so then how does your organization then have a conversation with school and education? Because you can't all be about taxes and policy.
Well, we have if you ask our members what are their number one concerns, it depends on the day, but for years their number one concern has been workforce. And that's at all levels. That's the operator of the tractor or bulldozer. That's the welder of the tractor or bulldozer. That's the tech person at the local dealer. It's at all levels. So that's been the number one thing. So we've kind of been going through a number of things. There's fortunately kind of a growing movement in all of North America to revisit trade schools, revisit work-ready education. We're big proponents of that. Obviously, I benefited from college, and it was a great experience. But it's not for everybody, and I think we've learned that that's not for everybody. And certainly in small towns, it's really important to sort of recognize the value of staying home, staying back in the community, giving back to your community, because there's good, meaningful work, good, well-paying jobs that can be had at the local manufacturing facility, or whether it's for the big brand or for one of the component manufacturers that feed up to it. So we do that through 4-H, through FFA, through all of these organizations that are supporting youth, because we find that you've got to have those conversations early, 10, 12, up to 15. After that, they might have made their mind up and we might have lost them.
We're going to get to FFA. Don't worry.
Okay,
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Can't do it without it.
But I want to go back to communities that you and I live in, and I think of Iowa that has a major move to larger metropolitans.
Yeah.
And I think of Fargo. I think of Kansas City, St. Louis. Those communities have had lots of people leave rural areas and go into those.
Yes.
How do you spring those kids back out of the suburb schools or the city schools back out to go work in, Grand Prairie or Grand Valley. Pick a small town that has a manufacturing plant that might have an engineer need or an accountant need that are part of that company, let alone the worker themselves on the line.
One thing that we've learned, I guess maybe the hard way, is that oftentimes recruitment is local. An a workforce issue is a local issue, oftentimes in small towns. So when you recruit someone from Fargo to all of a sudden live in Shelbina, Missouri, that may not work out long term. And so we find more and more our manufacturers try to say, well, let's reach these kids before they leave the town, keep them inspired, get them excited about the opportunity, provide all the opportunity in the world for them to get trained. So that's it's a longer term play, but that's really important. One thing that you mentioned when we talk about some of our policy priorities about focusing in on rural America is that rural broadband is a great equalizer. And it does provide better opportunities than we've had in decades for someone to have a good, meaningful career, perhaps remote, or if it's a husband-wife pair or a married couple, the ability for one to be in a role that's might be a little bit more local and one to be remote, because that rural broadband allows for for those needs to be met in both places. I think generationally we're also seeing some shifts where my generation of Gen X, I love talking about the difference of the personalities of the generations, but Gen X, we were pretty quick to get out of small towns and not necessarily look back. I think the generations that are graduating from high school today have a completely different view about small towns in rural America and maybe even a simpler life. And, these things may correct themselves.
Why are we speaking to the others? Because we really are on the same page. I mean, we're the same way. We're about the same age, about the same town, size that we grew up in. Yeah, it wasn't that I didn't want to come back, but I was like many, products of something just didn't line up. Yeah. But I'm also thinking about Coach Drinkowitz. When he's recruiting to Columbia, he might get Fort Lauderdale, but it doesn't always work to get that kid to come.
Exactly. Well, the transfer portal is a whole different conversation.
Transfer portal, whatever the cash says. But I mean, it's the same way with the workforce as it is. It's Absolutely. Like if you're not used to that type of a community, it's not going to work out. And you want a community to have that manufacturing base or build that company there. You don't want it always in a suburb or in a city.
Well, I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so you want a franchise player. You want a Patrick Mahomes that comes in and invests in your company, not just of their time, but their treasure, and invests in the community and becomes part of that community. They're a better worker. You're going to get more out of them, and it's going to be better for everything. So I think there's some areas within Iowa specifically that have a rich history of manufacturing, and I'm just amazed when you go to around Pella. It's amazing how much manufacturing is part of that culture down there. There's some great family-owned companies that have been there for generations. But then within those manufacturing facilities, there's generations that are working for those same companies, multi-generations. And so it's part of the community. It gets woven into the fabric. Yeah. That doesn't happen everywhere, but it does make a big difference. And that's why, Pella, Iowa, as an example, is not just a bright spot for Iowa, but a bright spot for, frankly, all of the United States for how do you do this correctly? How do you do workforce correctly?
And Pella supports those companies in Pella support for an hour around.
Absolutely.
I mean, I grew up exactly, and I grew up in a community in the shadow of John Deere, and they drove 45 to an hour as well, if not longer, to go work. And so it does impact a big geography. When you look at 4-H and you look at FFA and their recruitments of students to join those organizations, but what's the outside involvement? I mean, you personally and professionally have, but just specifically on FFA, to highlight some of the importances of working in a community.
My FFA experience in Missouri meant a lot to me, and it actually influenced my career, influences kind of everything I do every day. I sort of stepped away from the organization for a number of years after serving as a state FFA officer and having a great experience there. But then when I started to realize as I got a little bit older is that my experience was great. I focused in on the leadership work that got me exposure around the nation, around the world that I wouldn't have seen necessarily otherwise. But what I quickly realized is where the biggest need within FFA right now is getting those getting those kids ready for school, getting those kids ready for work that are in high school today. That leadership track is really important. Boy, that vocational track is equally important. And when I was involved in the 80s, we were quickly moving away from that vocational track. In fact, we even changed the name from vocational agriculture to agricultural education as a way to sort of pivot more towards that professional track. And I think what we've quickly realized at the national level and certainly at all the state levels is like we might have swung the pendulum a little bit too far. So I invest my time and treasure to make sure that that organization, 4-H, AFA, and others are all focused in on making sure the workforce matches the needs of where the workers are needed.
All right. I know your organization and what you do is a look back, and I know looking forward isn't quite, but give me, as we close here, things that those kids and those following agriculture and in agriculture are going to watch here in the next 6 to 12 months that we need to see that will be those indicators that something is changing, the market is coming back in ag manufacturing, and where when we start to see numbers on a chart head up in a different direction.
Well, we are a look-forward organization for everything except for predicting the market. So let me be very clear on that. So what I get excited about and can talk about all day long is that a farmer doesn't buy a tractor for tomorrow; they buy a tractor for the next 5 years. Agriculture is always going to be in need, and here in the United States, we produce the best and most efficient crops in the world. So yeah, there's some tough spots, maybe for the next few months, but boy, the long-term outlook couldn't be more exciting. So I look really, I think the storm clouds that we're dealing with right now, whether it's interest rates or, global unrest or trade or questions around biofuels, questions around, ethanol or other things like that, those will resolve themselves, and we'll find the certainty that where the water will find its level. But boy, to get involved in an industry that is rich with data, that we're just on the cusp of seeing what we can do with land because of modern technology, artificial intelligence, tractors that drive themselves, that gets exciting. And for a young kid to be a part of that and truly make some revolutionary changes that will last for centuries, not just decades, what a cool opportunity for a kid to enter into this career right now.
Am I going to get you in trouble if I ask you this question? You can wave me off. Have we seen the end of the peak of the large tractor being produced, and we're going to be in those middle-sized units or smaller that are going to be driven by AI or driven by technology we're going to see this swarm of little smaller tractors back in the field?
That's a fun thought exercise. I don't have the answer, but I love having that conversation. And there certainly is a school of thought that says that we are about, max size for no other reason than the practical reality of being able to get it down the road. So we might be getting close to that. Now, 20 years from now, that'll sound like a really stupid statement. But so that's certainly one argument. But the other side of it that's really exciting, and you think about how much of the weight of a tractor or the weight of a spray boom is built in to create the size. And that size is created because of efficiency. We need that efficiency because we have labor shortages. When all of a sudden labor becomes less of an issue, the tractor can drive itself, you worry a little bit less about the size. Mm-hmm. Maybe you worry a little bit less about the weight, which means you worry a little bit less about the weather conditions. The ripple effect of that is pretty fascinating. So the basic shape of a combine hasn't changed in 150 years. I mean, we created the combine, we put the thresher and harvester together, but for all practical purposes, it's just what used to be stationary became mobile, all with a central drive unit. That's been the same basic paradigm for 150 years. Mm-hmm. What happens when that paradigm changes just a little bit because your electricity can go in a straight corner versus hydraulics have to go at a curve, or a belt has to be in a straight line. All of a sudden, new paradigms can show up, and it's fascinating to see what will happen as a result of new data, new stuff that's available that we haven't even dreamed of yet. It'd be fun to see. So are swarm tractors part of it? I think they are. in some instances. I think greenhouses are a really important thing to take a look at in some instances. But also the stuff that sorry about that, got a tickle. So swarm robots are really part of the story. Greenhouses are part of the story. But also the equipment that we're used to seeing today, the large equipment that gets bigger and bigger, that's part of the story as well. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a mixture of all of them. And I don't know what's going to be, but I'm pretty excited about what it's going to look like.
Because we look at Brazil and wide open fields, big equipment's not going away there. No. And we look at, you drive to Wisconsin on a regular basis. Those are smaller fields.
There are some smaller fields.
And Minnesota and Michigan, smaller places. I just did an interview with a researcher at Michigan State who's looking at that, answering that labor question and the automation and trying to put the two together. Yeah. Lastly, let's finish on trade, because you've kind of mentioned it is that one thing that we may have to, one of those things that they're monitoring. Yeah. We do a lot of trade in North America, and manufacturing on both sides of the border, and there's always this constant thing. Are you concerned about agriculture getting caught up in the middle of some of this?
I am. I absolutely am. And I think every one of your listeners and viewers should be as well if you're involved in farming. This is important. We rely on our biggest trading partner to the north and to the south. And I think that's a critical conversation we need to be paying attention to. And then in addition, we've got some trading partners that are big consumers of grain produced here in the Midwest that we don't necessarily like that well, or that don't necessarily like us. And that creates some real pressure on our market. It's a delicate dance that we have to play. And I don't want farmers to be caught in the middle. But it kind of appears that we are run that risk of being in the middle of this conversation.
Lot to do.
Lot to do.
All right.
Let's call that job security,
We'll call that job security. MIZ.
ZOU.
My thanks to Curt Blades for his time as we discuss that issue. And thank you for watching. New episodes of this podcast come out each and every Tuesday. If you want to find out what's next, subscribe to the Market Insider newsletter, available wherever you go on our website. You can't miss the sign up. Send us an email at markettomarket@iowapbs if you have a different question or you want me to talk about a different topic. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.